Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Meta Talk, where we'll be discussing multilateral financial instruments as part of our hybrid Meta Week 2020. I welcome new friends, old friends, and partners who will enrich us today with their information. Maybe I'll start with a little bit of intro. We, as ASCAMI and as SIBA, the Euro Chamber of Egypt, we've been working for the past 10 years on a very important task that was supported by both European Commission as well as EIB, where we do a comprehensive survey of every cent that's availed for the Mediterranean, from Morocco to Jordan, every country around the Mediterranean, what's availed from multilateral, bilateral donors, development institutions, development funds, including Arab funds. We've been working sourcing from Mexican aid to Australian aid and everything in between. And the total that's availed is 22 billion euros of grants, technical assistance, and soft loans on first come, first served basis. This annual survey, is availed on the website of ASCAMI, where anybody who's interested can download. I don't want to waste time since we have very high-level experts representing the key players in the region. And without delay, let me start with my dear friend Ingrid, who's the deputy head of unit of DG NEAR, who's responsible for a big chunk of the money that we're operating with. One of them is our regional project, EPSOMED, which is the most important tool for supporting business within the Mediterranean. Ingrid, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, our friend Alaes, and thanks and welcome to all the other colleagues from multilateral institutions. Indeed, my name is Ingrid Schweiger. I'm working at DG NEAR. That's the part of the Commission dealing with what we call the Neighborhood South. So our partner countries in the South, and working on regional programs, but also regional instruments. And let me say the topic of this forum, Time to Transform, could not be more relevant at the moment. What I would like to very briefly talk about, it's what the EU is planning to implement for economic recovery in the region, with a focus on private sector development. And I want to refer to one of the key tools in this context, because we talk about multilateral finance, namely the external investment plan. So on COVID, perhaps 2-3 words on the immediate EU response to the COVID pandemic in the MENA region before talking about our longer term approach for post-COVID economic recovery. We are still all in the pandemic. Hopefully we will be out very soon. So the EU immediate response was really support to partner countries in coping with the emergency health needs, but also to mitigate the social impact of the pandemic through grants, urgent health equipment, creating more fiscal space, but also private sector support to address especially the liquidity and the financial situation. And this we do mainly by working through international financial institutions. And I'm very happy to note that many of our partners are on the panel. I see EBRD, EIB, World Bank, and so forth. In other words, private sector support was very much part already of our immediate response. Now, beyond, of course, the longer term perspective. And let me say a few words about also the policy context on this. We are on the 18th of November. In a few days from now, we will celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Barcelona process. And this has really put the Southern Mediterranean at the core of our relation. And it's a very good opportunity to reflect on the challenges, opportunities, and to renew our partnership with a new strategy. And our Commissioner Vacheli will launch the preparation of a new communication on the Southern Neighborhood, and with economic recovery and investment as a key part of that endeavor. In parallel, we also will start the preparation of what we call the multi-annual programming, so the next 7 years under a new instrument. And all this will help us to underpin the new partnership with the South, also with the new funds under NDG and the new priorities. Now, a few words on the approach. So, the longer term approach to the post-COVID economic recovery. Uh, we would we aim to support our partners in tackling the huge challenges of the COVID pandemic, but also the rising inequalities, the employment questions, climate change. So it's a very broad spectrum of challenges we have. And for this, we intend to build on the external dimension of the priorities of our Commission, such as the Green Deal, opportunities created by the digital transition, and a third priority, an economy that works for people. Um, so under this theme of an economy that works for people, it's not just a sustainable economic recovery in the region, but it's also, more attention to reduce inequalities, to deliver on decent jobs, especially for young and the women. And this includes new business models such as social entrepreneurship, green economies, financial inclusion, and so on. I have mentioned the Green Deal that will also be at the heart of our approach, talking about clean energy transition, climate resilience, better use of sustainable of natural resources. Because as we know, the MENA region, it's the world's most affected region by climate change, and we really need innovative solutions there. And the last major theme, the digitalization, we have seen in COVID what huge role that plays and what a quantum leap we all did, not by choice, but by necessity. And we will promote digital transformation, supporting investment in digitalization, but as well as skills and entrepreneurship. In summary, to support the post-COVID economic recovery, we really want to push this forward-looking agenda for the green digital transition with a focus on private sector development and putting micro and small and medium-sized enterprises at the center of this, because they are the engines for job creation. Now, let me zoom in on the key tool we want to use in this context, namely the European External Investment Plan. This is something where we work hand in hand with European and international financial institutions. And the policy objective behind it, it's really jobs, growth, and prosperity. And in a nutshell, the background, as we all know, funds from the public sector are not sufficient to meet the massive investment needs of the region, and even more so after COVID. We talk about infrastructure, we talk about energy, digital, green, SME access to finance, financial inclusion. All this requires that other actors are mobilized, notably financial institutions with their instruments and the private sector. So here we work via financial institutions through two main tools, blending, where we mix financial instruments with grant money from the Commission, and guarantees to de-risk investment, to make it possible to bring in actors who would not invest under these conditions. When all this was launched in 2017, an amount of 4.1 billion euro was dedicated for guarantees and blending projects by 2020. And if you count in the leverage effect of about 10 times, we are talking about 44 billion euro in overall investments. The good news is that by the end of last year, we exceeded these expectations. The neighborhood has accounted for a large share of the approved projects. And for example, recently during the Finance in Common Summit, a package worth 990 million euro was signed with partner financial institutions. So we think it's really a very powerful tool. Now, let me conclude on the topic time to transform, because that's the theme of this session. We want to build on these successes and increase the allocation for the guarantee for the future programming. So that's an issue of quantity, of making more funding available for the economic recovery. But, and here I come really to the effect of COVID and the context of COVID, we have to look more closely at the quality of the investment. I mentioned an economy that works for people. So the vision is really to have investment as a tool to work for people and with an impact on society. And this entails questions, how to ensure linkages of investment, FDI to local economy. How do we get the good spatial distribution of the gains from investment? Not just in the capitals or the coastal areas. There are rural areas, there are different parts of the country. How to ensure inclusion of vulnerable groups, the inclusive finance idea, and how to really target investment for job creation. Just a few ideas and examples, also how this could be useful for next generations. So partly we do this already. I want to mention, for example, a large microfinance fund, SANAT, we set up under the EIB with KfW, which targets vulnerable groups and women, and which was reinforced under the immediate COVID response because they were the most exposed and it needed new funding. On another level, we recently organized with the UFM and the German presidency a forum with the theme jobs through trade and investment. So to zoom in on this role of investment on job creation. We have launched a regional trade and investment package. So these are regional programs where, for example, we work with the OECD to also have a strong public-private sector dialogue on sustainable investment policies, or to work with the ILO to look at the nexus between investment policies and employment policies, to bring this dimension into the policy debate. It also means to enlarge to new actors, working with the social and green economies. And in this context, we are launching a study on impact investors, so bringing in new actors also. And use the opportunities from digital for startups, the role of startups and incubators. We have, for example, an initiative with Next Society on this. So these are different examples. The role of the private sector is key. And there I want to come back to what was said in the introduction, the importance also of networks, of business organizations such as EPSOMET to bring the different actors together. So as a final word, let's use the pandemic not only as a threat, but also as an opportunity to build back better. I'll stop here and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. It's always a pleasure to have you with us, and thanks for the overview of what the European Commission intends to do. And let me assure you that we're always catering to the needy, not the greedy, and we always look at gender. I think you noted that in most of our activities, we have almost 50% gender balance within our projects, not to mention youth. And mentioning the external investment plan, we have done in Egypt, Tunisia, Jordan promotional activities for it, because the problem is not finance, but as probably will be mentioned by all our distinguished speakers, is finance, to know where it is and how to access it. That's the most important part, not just availing the finance. And We're looking forward to the new programming period, and we hope that we do more blending. We're already blending between regional, cross-border, as well as bilateral programs of the European Commission with member states as well as other multilaterals. So I think we're moving in the same spirit, and our aim by the end of the day is creating jobs and learning from the pandemic. We see actually opportunities that were brought up by the pandemic, and we try to cater to the needs that are coming out of it. Now we move to, the whole world knows the World Bank and the IMF. The business community deals with one specific element of the World Bank, which is the International Finance Corporation. And we used to say in business that if you get a $1 loan from IFC, then money pours on you from all multilateral, bilateral, even commercial banks, because they're the most stringent in evaluating projects. They're the best in that. And if we see the portfolio in the North Africa and East Mediterranean region, we see lots of very important projects by private sector that were funded by IFC. And it gives us great pleasure to have with us Mr. Soufiane El Aissa, the regional head of operations within the MENA region, who my understanding is also in Egypt. So, Soufiane, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ala, for the introduction. In fact, I'm based in Dubai. And good evening, everybody. It's my honor to be here today. I think it's very difficult to speak after Ingrid, because I think she laid the foundation, in terms of the importance of the role of the international community, especially like IFIs and the multilateral development institution, not only responding to COVID, but also, in my view, to addressing some of the pressing development challenges and unlocking some of the opportunities in the region. So, in fact, I'll try to build on what Ingrid mentioned in her remarks, and to highlight a few key issues when we talk about MENA region. And I think indeed it is very timely to talk about the role of IFIs and development institutions given COVID crisis, but we are talking also about a region that was coupled also with other challenges. To start with, low oil prices, but also the pressing development challenges, including the issue of jobs, where we are in MENA region need to generate or to create around 300 million jobs between 2020 and 2050s. And here, Dr. Ala, you mentioned the issue of gender. I can't agree with you more about the importance of this issue, not only in terms of direct intervention, but also as we do as IFC and the World Bank Group to mainstream all our activities, gender issues into our activities and projects. And one of the estimation basically that the region is missing around $2.7 trillion of contribution to GDP because of lack of full integration of women into labor market and utilizing the economic opportunities. So I think these are important development issues, but also opportunities. Then the traditional development challenges that we talk about, debt to GDP, the limited space for governments to spend on infrastructures, health and education, the dominance of the public sector, and of course, issues related, to challenges, related to access to finance, especially for SMEs, addressing the issue of infrastructure gap, and of course, the climate business and water shortage. So you can imagine the type of challenges. And I should say that some countries in the region, before COVID, moved in the right direction in terms of creating a healthy and enabling environment for doing business. You see many countries in the region, in fact, were ranked highly as part of our doing business report. And secondly, many countries, or several countries to be correct, especially Egypt, were managed to engage a reform to stabilize the economy and to create a macro context that could move the economy to new directions, without underestimating, of course, other challenges that all of us we are talking about. So this region of course, has unique development challenges, but also opportunities. A lot of work being done by us and other European institutions that the colleagues are representing. And I think one of the key area for all of us, which is the theme of the discussion, is not only our role is important, but even the coordination among each other is important, and also the work closely with governments and the private sector to ensure that we are basically implementing and pushing forward the right development and reform programs needed to unlock some of the opportunities and to create the jobs needed for the population. Now, in terms of our response to COVID, and I think this approach is not only driven by MENA region, but it has a global I would say umbrella and response to this crisis, because it's not only in a region that passing through this tough times. I think it's a global agenda, and here we are focusing on a three key type of intervention. Number one is relief, and mainly here we are trying through few facilities that we have. One is what we call it 8 billion fast track facility, that trying to ensure that our clients and our private sector actors in the region stay in business and provided working capital to continue their businesses as needed and to deliver the services needed for the population. And then another important global initiative is what we called a global health platform. It's a 4 billion platform that mainly targeting the health sectors and focusing on the whole supply chain of the whole sector, especially in the context of COVID. And of course, the issue of advisory services that we do to help many of our clients, especially financial institutions, in doing stress testing, improving their financial management to cope with the current crisis. In this context, we managed to book, as of September 2020, around 1.4 or 1.5 billion dollar in Africa and MENA region as part of this fast track facility, mainly to provide working capital for our clients to cope with the current situation. And then the second part is basically the restructuring. And here we talk about a lot of reform, helping countries, helping clients, to engage in the reform and the policy dialogue needed to cope with the current situation. Because let's face it, we have the development challenges before, we have the macro and private sector context in the region. The reality, the new normal, which is COVID era, that also changed the rule of the game. And here also I'll highlight a few things as Ingrid mentioned about going forward. So it needs a lot of more of policy response, that need to be implemented by government with the help of IFI and development institutions to facilitate that. So the restructuring part is really focusing on these important issues. And then the third part of our intervention is around recovery. And recovery, as Ingrid mentioned, I think it's the important slogan for all IFIs, to build back better. And here, what we are trying to do somehow, to focus on creating new markets and creating economic transformation in some of the countries that could not only address development challenges, but also unlock the potential for the private sector in a way to support the growth and job creation, and to create, at least in the context of MENA, the basically the job needed. Here, I would emphasize the importance of advisory program that we have in MENA region. Like other IFIs, especially European IFIs that are represented here, we have a quite significant advisory program, more than 100 advisory projects in the region, from Mashreq to FCS countries to North Africa. And then we have also the new pillar, which is mainly focusing on what we call it upstream, and upstream mainly focusing on unlocking some of the opportunities for the private sector. And here we have long history of doing that even before. I think we as World Bank Group, with the help also of other IFIs, if you hear about the major, one of the largest solar project in Egypt was unlocked because of some of the policy dialogue with the government, the enabling environment, and then the role of IFIs that we did. So we are aiming to replicate that, to create more opportunities, more investment by private sector, especially in the key areas that we focus on, addressing infrastructure gap, the issue of a climate business, and then the issue of supporting access to finance, and of course focusing more and more on issues that related to jobs, especially the issue of education, entrepreneurship, and of course digital economy, which is the most important area going forward. Maybe to summarize and try to conclude my intervention, few things. I think MENA region, like other regions, the new normal or the new COVID era, it created new realities. And also, as Ingrid mentioned, I think the issue of job is extremely important. But also the future of jobs is very important. What kind of jobs that the market should create? What kind of skills that young population from MENA region should enjoy to utilize some of the opportunities that are coming. Here, the issue of digital is very important. And I think this crisis proved to all of us that, and this meeting, without having the digital platforms and infrastructures, such meeting even will not take place, will not be possible. And here in MENA region, I think I would say that we need to go a long way before we develop the right infrastructure for that, but also to use it as financial inclusion model, especially for women and SMEs. And here, just to say that only 8% of SMEs, they are active or they have online platforms that they have it, whether for marketing or for selling, compared to maybe 20, 30% in other developing countries. And of course, in part one countries, the percentage is much higher. And the last point I would emphasize that more and more, despite all the effort, that we need really to emphasize the issue of investment climate and creating a healthy and enabling environment for the private sector. As government's space is very limited, and as I mentioned, debt to GDP basically is very high in many of the countries. So I think while we are unfortunately with all the lockdown, the impact of COVID that we have, and despite our response as IFIs and government response, I think this crisis is one of the most difficult one that all regions are dealing with. This economy supposed to be contracted by almost 5.7%, which never happened in the region in any crisis before. So my hope that with the programs that governments, IFIs, and development finance institution are doing, and hopefully this effort will be coordinated to transform this crisis into opportunity, and this opportunity to be around job, about financial inclusion, and about more important role and opportunities for women as a main source for supporting the bulk of the economy, which is microfinance and SMEs. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Sofiane. What you said was really music to my ears, and maybe I can summarize it in two short words: blending, enabling environment. And you rightfully mentioned, used Bimban as an example. In less than 3 years, it became the largest solar farm in the world, just simply and by private sector, and thanks to IFC in that. And simply because the government decided to be the highly needed regulator instead of the inefficient operator it is, and the private sector became the operator instead of being the spectator. And I think this is a classical example of when governments really move in the right direction, paving the way for the private sector to do its job, then development starts. And maybe I have to highlight and say thank you to both you and Ingrid as institutions, and I'll add to EIB and EBRD, because during the COVID period, with the technical assistance that was provided directly through you or through projects that we're operating, we managed to enact 2 presidential decrees, 4 prime ministerial decrees, 2 governor central bank decrees, and 38 ministerial decrees that helped pave the way for the private sector to operate. And today, for example, in Egypt, we have platforms for SMEs double the number we had before COVID. So it really was an opportunity, but thanks to donors, DFIs, and our development partners who helped us do that. Now I move to the new player in the region, EBRD. We've been fighting for years to get EBRD on board, to make all our countries countries of operation. And when they came with a storm. Though the amount of loans is not huge, but blending with technical assistance and grants to support these loans, I think they're the best in that domain. And that's a fact I've seen not only in Egypt, I've seen all around the Mediterranean. I can speak wearing my ASCAMI hat as executive board member, where I speak on behalf of the Mediterranean region. And it gives us great pleasure to move across the Mediterranean from east to west and to have with us Maria Alexandra, the director of EBRD in Morocco. So let's see what EBRD is doing in Morocco and regionally. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I hope you hear me very well. Indeed, we are the last IFI in the region, but I may contradict a bit what you just said. We have been extremely active since we've been there in the region for the last 6 years, since 2012. As we have invested more than 13 billion in 5 countries. And indeed, our focus has been very much focused on the private sector. So I'm not going to repeat what my 2 colleagues have just said, as we are all very much aligned with what has been said. I think one of the distinctions that we have as EBRD is indeed that we are the last kid on the block. We just arrived in 2012 in the region, but we were asked to support the private sector, and to tackle regional disparities, issues faced by the large young population, gender inequalities as well. So we've been very, very much active in tackling those issues and also understanding the political economy and encouraging structural economic reforms. So I'm going to be very practical here, given the current situation. Our COVID-19 response has been extremely fast, practical, and responsive to our clients' needs. So basically, on the 13th of March, as soon as the pandemic was announced on the continent, we've said that we are ready to provide support of up to 21 billion euros to our countries until for 2020 and for 2021. And so this has been really a very important response that we've designed to both provide liquidity support to our existing clients for up to 4 billion euros in terms of short-term liquidity or working capital needs. And that has been proven that extremely needed, and we've deployed a lot actually in the region on that. The second response that we've made under the solidarity package is this vital infrastructure support program, where basically we were answering to funding to the funding needs for essential public investments. A third response that we've made is to increase significantly trade facilitation program basically meaning that we enlarge financing to protect channels of commerce. And we saw that there was a very, very, and we still see actually that there is strong needs to support imports and exports from our clients to the international markets. And my colleague from the IFC also mentioned policy advice. And this is extremely important. EBRD provides, both financing, but also policy dialogue and policy advice with the governments to make sure that we contribute together with other IFIs to improve the business climate and the investments climate. And so we've been providing, rapid, high quality and practical advice, policy advice to governments on specific niche, given the COVID needs. And finally, one of our response has been really to focus on the support to SMEs, to small and medium companies, by providing digital trainings and support so that they focus on how am I going to manage my liquidity needs, my operational needs right now, given the crisis of the short term, but also of the medium term and long term. So that was that is our response, and basically how it has been translated is the region, what we call CEMED, or the MENA region, which is the largest region of operation of the bank, has been one of the largest beneficiaries of the bank's solidarity package, with more than 1 billion euros deployed so far, both through banks, but also through state-owned companies and trade facilitation, and as well SME corporate support, SME and corporate support financing and restructuring, obviously. So that has been our response, and we're going to deploy this as well in the next few months. But taking both short-term view, but as well as a long-term view, given the current circumstances. So as it was said before, to build back better our country's economies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And maybe you misunderstood what I meant. I'll switch hats. I am also a first Undersecretary of State. It was me who was fighting to make Egypt a country of operation. And to me, RD is a very different type of IFI, simply because of the amount of blending of technical assistance that's being provided, as well as going down to earth, working at the level of SMEs more than any other DFI that's working in the whole region. And you've been partners in the past 6 years.
Yes, that's right.
Almost all.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah.
And your regional director, who's based always in Egypt, has always been a partner with us in all our activities. And maybe switching to the macro level, there is huge support that's being provided, improving the business climate, and especially when it focuses on micro and small enterprises, as well as gender issues. And let me maybe mention one important thing with the support of EBRD. We are having a huge initiative for financial inclusion for 1 million micro enterprises in Egypt. So that's a huge initiative where most of the funding is coming from Egyptian banks, but the structure and the technical assistance is from EBRD. So EBRD is doing an excellent job down to earth, which is very important. Now moving to an old partner for the past 20 years, maybe, showing my age, the big white elephant, the number one investor in the region, the European Investment Bank, which started first financing mega projects, then started doing the two-step loan through local banks, and then started doing technical assistance, which is a new game that in the past 4 or 5 years was being provided, and focusing at the start mainly at blue economy, green economy. So we're talking about renewable energies, energy in general, water, wastewater, and then moved into ports, airports, and now industry is taking a bigger share. But what's most important is the majority of the funding of EIB is now for the private sector, not for governments. And it gives me great pleasure to have Mr. Jean-Luc, who's the head representative for both Tunisia and Algeria, so we're moving away from Barcelona. Jean-Luc, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, and good evening, everyone. Well, I have almost nothing to add to what you just said. I think you said it all. Maybe just one little correction, if I may, is that although we are more and more focusing on the private sector, indeed the public sector financing remains predominant also in the region. But definitely with the COVID crisis and under the new programming period with the Commission, clearly our effort will go more and more to support the private sector. And I will tell you how we are going to do this in a moment. I don't know if you can see my few slides that I had prepared for to support this presentation, if it's possible to show them. If not, I will just remind people who don't know the EIB very well that indeed we are a EU institution. Okay, so you can move to the next slide. Yes, please, again. Just a few figures to remind what EIB is. So it's an EU institution which was established by the Treaty of Rome in 58 in actual fact. We are predominantly active in Europe, but we also cover a large number of non-European countries, more than 100 actually. And we have offices we are based in Luxembourg, and we have offices in more than 50 countries around the world. Next slide, please, the two next slides, because there is a kind of title in between. You can see here that although the majority of our funding still goes to the EU, there is a big chunk of it, which is 8 billion euros, which goes to non-EU countries. And among the countries outside the EU, the MENA region is the one that receives the most of our funding, with more than 2.3 billion euros last year. And one of the first focus of our activity here is, as indicated in the right, private sector development. And this is more and more the case, actually. It's true that in the past, EIB was financing public sector infrastructure. But now, clearly, especially in light of the limited borrowing capacity of most countries in the region, and the increasing need for basic infrastructure for growth and employment, the involvement of the private sector is becoming a necessity. So, how can we support the private sector? Can you move to the next two slides, please? We have a number of instruments which we have been using in the past and which we are developing now in light of the dire and difficult situation in the region, in cooperation with the European Commission for most of it, and together with the other IFIs. I mean, you have probably heard of this Team Europe initiative that was launched in the context of the COVID crisis. And clearly, EIB is also trying to support private sector stakeholders in the context of the Team Europe initiative through three different types of instruments. The first one is for small businesses through intermediaries. And I will say just a word on this in a moment. The second one is direct financing of large companies of the region, of the MENA countries. And we have a few which have been doing great in the last years and need definitely our support currently. And the third one is to try to attract private sector investors to build large infrastructure through PPPs and project finance deals. So if I can move to the next one, please, one. Yes. So this describes, I'm not going to enter into the details, but I will just give you a few recent examples of what we did to support micro-entrepreneurs, SMEs, and mid-caps in the context of the COVID crisis. I mean, this was one of our most important response, together with the financing of the health sector on the public side. It was really to offer financial intermediaries, which include microfinance institutions, commercial banks, public banks as well, and private equity funds, or support. And we have done that in a number of countries across the region. We have signed in Morocco with microfinance institutions, Alamana. We have signed in Lebanon with Vitas. At the end of last year, just before the COVID crisis, we made a large loan also to ENDA, which is a large microfinance institution in Tunisia. And also we have extended very large credit lines to banks, 200 million to Crédit Agricole in Morocco, but also 800 million to the National Bank of Egypt, to reach SMEs. That's very important to reach SMEs all over the countries, in all regions, and not only in on the coast or in big cities. So we're doing a particular effort to basically oblige the banks to reach non-served clients through these loans. If you can move on to the next two slides. In the corporate world, these are a few examples of recent deals that we have done in the region. This is really something that we will try to develop in the coming months and years, trying to, in a way, support the development and investments of this group in the region. Preferably by providing loans in euro, because unfortunately we have very scarce access to local currency, or when it's not possible, work with commercial banks as an intermediary to provide local currency funding to these groups. So we will be able to support these groups with big tickets, a large amount of money, and obviously loan maturities like we have done in the past at relatively low interest rates, in order to help these groups to go through the difficult times. All these investments will be creating growth and jobs. Just to take one example, One Tech in Tunisia. This operation, which was concluded a few years ago, created more than 700 jobs here in Tunisia. So that's really a win-win situation. When you create job, you obviously create growth, and you create fiscal revenues for the state, and so on and so forth. And finally, if I can end this short presentation, moving to the next slides, please. We should not forget, obviously, the big projects, and IFC was mentioning them already. These are two examples of large projects that we have financed recently, one in Tunisia, the other one in Jordan. But it seems to me that these projects will represent a large share of our activity in the coming years, precisely because the public sector will not be able to afford financing and building this project. The involvement of the private sector will be even more necessary. And I see a couple of sectors where this type of private sector involvement will be relatively easy to do. Obviously, the production of green energy is one of them. Also, the solid waste management can be another one. Access to water with the desalination plant, for example. We have financed a large desalination plant in Israel a couple of years ago as well. I mean, these are areas where indeed we need to have, all of us, together with the other institutions, a role here to crowd in private finance to make sure that these projects are well prepared through technical assistance and also screening of environmental and social consequences and impact of this project. And this is where we IFIs have a big role to play. So maybe one word to conclude, again, is that in the context of the next MFF and during the next programming period, we will intensify our efforts to support the private sector, probably along three main objectives. The first one will be climate. I mean, EIB is definitely positioning itself as the climate bank, and we will only finance investments which are in line with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. So that's the first theme. The second one is to increase access to finance for all types of entrepreneurs, from micro entrepreneurs to large corporates. And the third one is, as my colleagues already said, innovation and digitalization. I think these are the three themes around which we will work together with the Commission and our partner institutions in the coming years. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Jean-Luc, for this excellent overview. And I know it's not easy to put billions in a couple of minutes, but maybe one important thing is the legacy of EIB within the region. You're the ones who introduced non-banking instruments, whether we're talking investment funds, venture capital, into the region. And these are the self-sustained instruments that you created that today are supporting SMEs and micro enterprises throughout the whole region. This is one very important thing besides the infrastructure, besides the green economy and the blue economy and all the other elements that you were touching. To that, we are grateful as private sector. Now moving to the real multilateral, the United Nations. And it gives us great pleasure to have the United Nations Capital Development Fund with us today, and its senior investment manager, Mohammed Abadi, will be joining us. Mohammed, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, distinguished panelists and guests. Thank you for having me today. Just as a quick introduction, the United Nations Capital Development Fund, UNCDF, we focus on making public and private finance work for the poor in the world's 47 least developed countries and developing countries. So we have a very specific focus on the South. We have a capital mandate and instruments that we offer to our clients in the last mile finance with the objective of unlocking public and private resources, especially at the domestic level, to reduce poverty and support local economic development. So that is in a nutshell what UNCDF focus is. Now, maybe in order not to repeat what the previous distinguished panelists have already mentioned, maybe I can focus my intervention on two areas. The first area is the issue of urbanization in developing countries. And the trends really clearly show that it is happening at such an unprecedented rate. We see small villages and towns evolving to urban cities or towns at a rate that does not catch up with the infrastructure needs, creating a real overload on the existing infrastructures and the inability of local governments and municipalities to meet the basic needs and demands of their own people. That is the reality today, and the trends speak for themselves. So, but to top it off, many cities and local governments in the developing countries also largely depend on fiscal transfers from central government with very limited authority over their own source revenue. So, such as, for example, like tax collection, right? Although in the most part, they are responsible for the tax collections and the revenue stream, but the vast majority of that gets transferred upward to the central government. And as such, it has, very limited control over their own source revenue and local management and in the investment cycle. So to add to that complication, I think in many developing countries, the national policies might not always provide also the flexibility for municipalities to access capital markets, to access blended finance instruments from IFIs, from international development institutions directly. And that limits the financing flows available to at the local level, which is where most development efforts are needed, and where almost over 50% of the SDG targets, which all national governments has signed up to, must be met. So I think we can all see where the picture is going. You have over 50% of the SDG targets to be met by cities and local governments, but they barely receive less than 9% of financing flows down to the local level. So how are we really going to meet realistically the SDG targets moving forward, looking at infrastructure investments that can catch up to the increasing in urbanization and people's needs? And so it leaves us here at a kind of a choice that we have to make. Either we build green cities and municipalities that provide quality lives for the next generation, or we face a paradigm shift here in our existence with millions of people facing enormous challenges in their lives, and many of whom will choose to migrate, which is one of the reasons why migration trends have been on the rise in the Mediterranean region. So at UNCDF, we see this as a challenge and opportunity, especially as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. And it was very evident that local governments and cities were in the front line of the emergency response, and the role that they had to play in the preparations, in the mitigations and rebuilding became very center point. So here we start to now think, okay, well, what is the role of the private sector then in this discussion, and what is the role of the private sector in fostering local economic development and the challenges faced at the local level? I think we all have agreed that the private sector is the backbone of all developing countries, if we put it this way. But such a role cannot be looked at in isolation, because in my view, if we want a systematic approach to inclusive and sustainable development for the people within the local territories where they live, we must create an ecosystem where both local officials, local planning, investment bodies are working together with the private sector entrepreneurs, women and youth in a coordinated way to transform economies and investments in productive capacities. I mean, not every growth is meaningful growth, and not every investment is a meaningful investment. For growth and investments to have an impact on people, they have to be transformative and sustainable. So what is the UNCDF approach? I mean, our Center of Excellence for Local Development Finance and Local Government Finance has an award-winning dual key approach, investing with impact, where we work with, through our various programs in the countries where we operate, using our financing tools and instruments with cities and the private sector to kind of tackle three fronts. First, we work on systematically identifying and encouraging productive and catalytic investments in the developing countries. The second is how we can strengthen the SME sector to make them bankable and investment ready. And the third is how can we support to unlock the domestic finance as well as international commercial finance for public and private investments that are revenue generating, but at the same time have a transformative impact and measurable impact on the local economy, such as on climate change, women's economic empowerment, and resilience. To this, just a quick note, We have launched the Women's Economic Empowerment Index as an example, which is an instrument. It's a tool that can be used for private or public investments that can measure the impact of that investment on women's economic empowerment. It's one of our flagship measurement tools, just to show an example. But how, putting this in practice, how do we operate? We support local partners to source the investments, to undertake full due diligence. We structure the investments. We assess the development impact and financial impact additionality and sustainability on each investment. Then we work with the partner to unlock additional finance flows to each investment through various blended finance instruments, including UNCDF-owned grants, reimbursable grants, loans, or guarantees. And we support then the investment in the implementation phase, and then advise on the performance and impact measurement and reporting. That level of work is where UNCDF's strength is, where in the vast majority of the cases, there's a lot of revenue generating investments and pipeline of projects, but they're not at an investment ready stage for commercial financiers to even look at them. That's where we come in. We prep those investments, we invest in them, we structure them, we de-risk them, and we put them at an investment ready stage so that other financiers can come in and unlock the domestic and international finance to them. So on this, on this sphere, I also would like to kind of mention that, in order to support both the municipal finance as well as the SME finance, UNCDF has also entered into an agreement with a third-party fund manager for the creation of the first in the world international municipal investment fund called IMIF, which will provide debt instruments to cities and local governments for revenue-generating investments that are favorable to the conditions and realities of cities and local governments in developing countries. And similarly for the SMEs, we also have entered into another agreement with a third-party fund manager dedicated to SMEs that provides loans in the growth stage cycle of the SMEs growth, and it's also called BUILD. These are just few examples of additional financing, let's say, funds that UNCDF has partnered with to bring in that financing flows to the local levels, to SMEs, to municipalities, where most financiers are actually not going per se for many reasons related to capacity, the policy blockages, or the quality of the proposals on hand. So, in a summary, maybe I can finish by saying that look, the COVID-19 experiences clearly tells us that we need to build back better, and that's been shared by all the panelists. But we cannot build back better if we keep looking at each client in isolation. I mean, our efforts our efforts have to focus on bringing both actors together towards a kind of common local economic development approach that identifies capacity gaps in promotion of local economic development, that looks at economic analyses, on the planning cycle, on the investment cycle, the financing models, and other tools for public and private partners. It should focus on building national platforms so that the interventions being provided from development agencies and IFIs is not just investment by investment case, but we're actually there to help governments to build national platforms, national systems that can then operate on their own without the support of the United Nations or development partners in that sense. And then, also we have to look at, what is the enabling environment that we need to work and support governments and the private sector to improve from, how we can look at the credit guarantee schemes, specific policy and legislative and regulatory support to unlock, barriers that does not enable private sector and the municipalities to access additional financing flows. So thank you so much. I appreciate the time and to be part with you. And I also thank all the panelists for their amazing contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for this wonderful overview of one fund that I missed, but I don't think I'll miss it for long. We'll be nagging you as ASCAMI and as CBAN, Federation of Egyptian Chambers, and all our partner chambers all around the Mediterranean, where we will have to show you that it's not only governments who can get the job done, but the meso level, the business representative organizations can actually contribute a lot. And what we'll be seeking will be your know-how, your novel approaches, and we will be providing the funding from our own resources. So let's look forward to that. Now, last but not least, we move to a very important instrument within the Mediterranean. An instrument that bridges both shores of the Mediterranean, an instrument that's public-private partnership, and most important, it's an instrument that's demand-driven, that's people to people. D&I, cross-border cooperation, MED, which I'm proud to say that we as ASCAMI group, we have almost half the budget that's available for everybody in the 14 countries. And it gives us great pleasure to have our dear friend, Asmat Khaddash, the head of the eastern part of CBC. Asmat, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ala, and dear distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, good evening. First, I would like to thank on behalf of the Managing Authority and myself to thank for the invitation to be part in this imperative event. Also, I'd like to thank Ms. Ingrid because she just make the European and all the European efforts that has been done in the area and will be done in the near future. So I will go direct to save some time. I will go direct to my presentation, and if you allow me here, I would like to just to mention that the European Union in general is supporting its neighbors in either in the southern part or the eastern neighbors through different tools or instruments. And one of these tools is the European Neighborhood Instrument, which have different forms, either bilateral agreements or multilateral agreements or cross-border cooperation. And it is important here to mention that these instruments is actually the largest financial instrument by the European Union and used as a tool to support the neighbors in the different part in around the Europe. So here, please, next slide. Here, I will just concentrate in one, as I mentioned, one of biggest, largest funding programs within the cross-border cooperation, which is related to the Mediterranean basin, which is in order to support actions, projects to address common challenges in the basin that is interest for the two shores of the Mediterranean, the eastern side and the western side of the Mediterranean. The two largest programs were the ENPI program, which was the first programming period from 2007-2013, and we have now the current programming period for the 2014 to 2020. And these programs are bring together the territories or coastal territories of the 13 participating countries in order or in the view of fostering fair, equitable development on the both sides of the Mediterranean. The approach of these programs is working through calls of proposals, and these proposals will finance cooperation projects for a more competitive, innovative, and sustainable Mediterranean area. Next slide, please. For the first programming period, the project or the program, the ENI program has worked with more than 700 public and private actors from 13 participating countries, and it has financing more than about 95 projects. And we were lucky, or we were happy, that all these or most of these projects had exceeded the expectation in terms of outcome, on the partnership, on the stakeholder commitments. Here we can see some of the key figures about the main outcomes and good practices that were available and have been achieved during the first programming period. And these, for instance, we have the program through the different projects has supported more than 340 startups, has reached very good outcome and results on environment, on renewable energy, on working on people themselves. More than 35 people have been trained on different issues, and also on working on the climate change mitigation, waste management, integrated coastal zone management, as well as socio-economic issues. All these results and all these issues has a very high impact on the Mediterranean basin, on the results, and from these output, from these results, it has been built on it, and it has continued for the next programming period. In the next slide, please, I will just give a very brief example about one of these projects, or the main outcomes of this project. We have the program through the different projects have supported some SMEs, some companies, some entrepreneurs, support them to make the local brand to become as a producer. It is not just a subcontractor. They find some routes or the road. They pave the road for the globalization for their products, and this help especially the startup of the youth and the women in their projects, in their startups, to reach the global. Another example is the EDIL label. EDIL label is one of our projects that has produced a label or a platform to foster public and private dialogue in order to improve governance and to enhance investment, especially related to the policy and regulation to support the youth and women. Also, another further example is the Mediterranean diet, which is also, it has support to globalize the Mediterranean diet and to make it more competitive throughout the world, outside the program areas. All these examples from the ENPI has been gathered, has been let's say, organized in 4 thematic objectives for the next programming period. The next slide, please, which is the ENI program, which has next slide, please, cover the period of 2014-2020 with a total budget of 209 million euro. The next slide, please. Okay, in the next slide, we have launched 3 calls for a proposal. Next slide, please. And under this program, we have financed more than 64 projects. And these 64 projects were worked very closely, especially with the youth and with the women. Next slide, please. I will give you some example. One of these projects is the Best Mid-Grape project, which is used the winemaking waste in order to have a nanotechnological products for cosmetics or for some products that for human health. Next slide. The next project is about the textile business, and this is help the textile sector SMEs to expand internationally inside and outside the Mediterranean area and to enhance crop creation. Next slide, please. Also, in the program, under the current program, there are more than 7 million euro as a financial opportunities under different subjects: business creation, tourism, environment, innovation, and it is more related to the youth, young people, women, and for the SMEs. This is not the end of the story. Next slide, please. The ENI instrument now is preparing the program for the next programming period, 2021-2027, and all the works to prepare the document and the rules and the joint operation program is now under processing. So regarding it will cover different objectives. Next slide, please. It will cover greener Europe, general greener, low carbon, more connected Europe. Also, it will work with some specific objectives: cooperation, governance for Europe and its neighbor, and safer and more secure Europe. This is the program, how the program is working in general regarding the subject of today and how the program is responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. The program with its projects have rapidly adapted to the COVID pandemic and contributed to the global effort to address its consequences on the European, Euro-Mediterranean region. The first effort was done through the last call for a proposal, which is the capitalization call, where we enhance or encourage the project applicants to work on term of job creation and business and transition to carbon neutral economic and efficient delivery of social care services and to support the most of poor or vulnerable people. Also, the projects, they have some impact on the implementation, and so the managing authority also has prepared some information and issued some series of recommendations for safe project implementation and to adopt any measures to overcome the pandemic effect and the negative impact on the project implementation. So this is in general how we are work with the in these two programs, and there are a lot of information, and we are available to support and to give further details. Sorry because for the time limitation, which make me go very faster. So I hope I give clear information to you. And again, thank you for inviting us, and I will be very happy in case for any clarification. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asmat, for this overview of EMPI CBC and ENI CBC MED, where a lot of initiatives have been created, a lot of partnerships have been created, and most important, long-lasting partnerships have been created. And I'm proud to say that 17 projects have become institutions that are self-sustained. And this, in my opinion, is the real success of CBC within the Mediterranean. Distinguished speakers, distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, unlike normal conferences where we can carry on speaking as much as we want, in these web-based conferences, they just cut us off. So, closing, I would like to thank our speakers for being with us today. I would like to thank their institutions for the support they're providing for the Mediterranean. And last but not least, to thank the audience and the organizers, and to thank my Askami for organizing the 14th MEDA Week, and looking forwards to seeing you all again in our new initiatives. Thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you too.
Thank you, Dr. Ala.